Hey everyone, welcome back. So today we're going to be going on kind of a deep dive into how our childhood experiences can shape our adult lives.
Wow.
And the thing that's interesting about the source that we're looking at for this deep dive is it says we're not just talking about the big capital T traumas. We're
Right.
talking about really subtle things like um maybe there was financial stress in your household growing up, or maybe you just never really felt heard or seen emotionally,
Hmm.
and these can leave a lasting impact.
It is amazing how much we carry with us,
Yeah.
you know, like almost like hidden patterns that we don't realize
Yeah.
are kind of rooted in our
It's
past.
like we're emotional
That's
archaeologists.
a good one.
We're brushing away the dust and uncovering all these artifacts. But
Right?
the cool thing about this deep dive is we're not just going to dig things up. The source we're looking at actually gives some pretty cool tools for like shifting these
Oh,
patterns.
interesting.
Things like EFT and hacking reality. Have you heard of these?
I've heard of those, yes.
Yes. Okay, cool. So we're going to dig into all that stuff. But I think to start it off, one of the things that really stood out to me in this source material is this idea, and I think you touched on it briefly, that childhood adversity is linked to mental health issues
Hmm.
in the same way that like smoking is linked to lung cancer. And this is from Dr. Gabor Mate, who's like,
Yes, yes.
a leading expert in trauma. So that's kind of a powerful statement.
Yeah, he's really good at explaining this stuff. But it's true. Our early experiences, especially during those, really important developmental years,
Hmm.
they really shape the very structure and function of our nervous system.
So is it kind of like you're building a house, and if the foundation's messed up,
Yeah,
the whole house is going to be a little...
exactly, exactly.
That's
It's a
good.
great analogy. Think about it. Like if the foundation is shaky,
Yeah.
the whole structure is going to be vulnerable.
And so that kind of sets us up then for how we're going to respond to stress and relationships and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the thing is like the ways we adapt to survive difficult situations as kids, sometimes those become burdens in adulthood.
Okay, so how do we know, like, when is something just a personality quirk, and when is it like an actual trauma response?
That is the question, isn't it? Like, how do we tease those two apart?
Right, because I think a lot of people listening are probably thinking, well, yeah, I mean, I work too much, or I, have trouble saying no,
Yeah.
but is that just me, or is that like a...
Right. And the source actually outlines several patterns that we see time and time again
Oh, interesting.
that often stem from childhood trauma.
Hmm.
So, for example, let's take the classic overachiever.
Okay.
This can be a trauma response to growing up in a household where love and approval felt conditional.
So you're always trying to prove your worth?
Exactly. You never feel like you're quite enough unless you're achieving something.
Oh, wow.
Or another one is a fear of success. This can be a trauma response to maybe witnessing a parent being punished or criticized or even sabotaged for their achievements.
Oh, so you're subconsciously avoiding success.
Exactly. You don't want to experience that same pain or rejection.
That's so interesting. I've never thought about it that way.
And then another common one is people pleasing,
Oh, yeah.
where you're constantly, trying to keep everyone else happy.
Mm-hmm.
And this can develop when a child learns that their needs are secondary to the needs of others.
Always putting other people first.
Always putting other people first.
So how do we start to deal with this if these things are like so ingrained in us?
Well, that's where things get really interesting
Mm.
because the source suggests that, traditional therapy, which can be very valuable,
Yeah.
sometimes it falls a little bit short
How so?
because it often focuses on the symptoms rather than addressing the root cause.
So we're treating the anxiety or the depression,
Yep.
but not necessarily going back to...
Not really untangling the underlying trauma that might be fueling it.
Mm.
And the source highlights this key concept from Dr. Joe Dispenza, who talks about the idea that our body is the subconscious mind, meaning that trauma
Mm.
isn't just a mental or emotional experience, it's actually stored in our very cells.
So it's like a physical thing.
It becomes a physical thing.
Wow. So we need something that goes beyond talk therapy.
Yeah, well, we need something that can actually work with the body
Mm-hmm.
to release that trauma.
Okay, so this is where things like EFT come in.
This is where EFT comes in exactly.
So for people who don't know, tell us a little bit about EFT.
So EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques.
Okay.
And it's basically this really cool combination of acupressure and focused affirmations.
So we're tapping on points on our body to rewire our brain.
Yeah, essentially what we're doing is we're sending a calming signal to the brain by tapping on these meridian points,
Mm-hmm.
which are like specific energy pathways in the body,
Okay.
while focusing on the issue at hand. So we're basically saying to our nervous system, hey, you're safe now.
Yeah.
It's okay to let go.
So what's actually happening in the brain and body when we do that?
So research has actually shown that EFT can reduce cortisol levels,
Which is the stress hormone.
which is our primary stress hormone,
That's
right?
it.
And it can actually calm the amygdala,
Mm.
which is the part of the brain that's responsible for that fear response.
So it's like resetting our stress system.
It's like hitting the reset button, exactly.
Okay, so we're not just talking about some woo-woo technique here. There's actual science behind this.
There's real science backing this up.
Okay, cool. And then the source material goes on to talk about this other concept called hacking reality,
Yes.
which kind of blows my mind. So tell us about that.
So hacking reality builds on the principles of EFT,
Okay.
but it takes it a step further. It's this idea that our memories are not actually set in stone.
Wait a minute.
We can actually change the way we perceive
Whoa.
our past experiences by reframing the narrative and changing the emotions.
So you're telling me we can, like, rewrite our past?
In a sense, yes, by rewriting the emotional script that's attached to those memories.
Okay, hold on. We got to dig into this more.
Let's do it.
Because I have a lot of questions about this. Is it really that easy? How does this work in practice? Can people use this to avoid responsibility for, like, their present choices?
Well, that's an important distinction to make. It's not about denying or erasing the past, but rather changing the way those experiences affect us in the present.
Okay.
Imagine, if you will, a memory as a movie reel.
Okay.
With hacking reality, we're not changing the film itself, but we're adding a new soundtrack,
Interesting.
new lighting, a new perspective that shifts the entire emotional impact.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how this could be really powerful, but can you give us, like, an example of how this actually works?
Absolutely. So the source tells this great story about Sarah, who is this very successful businesswoman, but she was chronically overworked
Mm-hmm.
and struggled to set boundaries.
Oh, yeah, been there.
And through EFT, she discovered this deep-seated belief that her worthiness was tied to her productivity and her ability to please others.
That's so common.
It is very common. And for her, it stemmed from these early childhood experiences of feeling unseen and unheard, unless she was achieving or helping.
So she learned to get love and approval through doing things for others.
Exactly.
Okay, so how did she use this hacking reality thing to change that?
Well, she started by visualizing a new version of her past one, where she felt loved and accepted unconditionally just for being herself.
So she's basically rewriting the emotional script.
Exactly. And by repeatedly rehearsing this new memory, she literally rewired her brain's emotional associations.
Wow. And so over time, did she start to feel differently?
Yeah, over time, she found it much easier to set boundaries in her work and personal life. And her relationships actually became more balanced and fulfilling.
That's incredible. So it's like we really can create a new reality for ourselves.
That's the key takeaway. We're not doomed to repeat these patterns forever. We have the power to create a new reality.
But how does that actually play out in our lives? Like, what happens when we start to heal these patterns? So we'll dive into that in the next part of our deep dive. All right, so we're back, and we just learned how, like, childhood stuff can really stick with us, but the good news is we can actually, like, rewrite those old stories and, you know, kind of make a new reality for ourselves.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, when we start to do that, when we start to heal these patterns, how does that, like, show up in our lives?
Well, that's where it gets really exciting because the source material really paints this picture of transformation that starts to happen when we address these root causes. And one of the biggest areas where we see this is in our relationships.
Oh, that makes sense. Because if you're not coming from a place of, like, fear or insecurity
Right.
or, you know, always trying to please people,
Exactly.
then your interactions are going to be totally different.
They're going to be so much healthier and more fulfilling. And here's the thing. As we heal, we actually start attracting different kinds of people into our lives.
Well,
We're no longer drawn to those who kind of reinforce those old patterns. And we're also better equipped to set boundaries.
oh, yeah. Boundaries are huge.
Boundaries are huge. They're essential for any healthy relationship.
I've definitely struggled with that in the past, like saying no or just, like, expressing what I need. It's like I'm so afraid of, like, upsetting someone or, you know, making them not like me.
And that's so common, especially if you grew up in an environment where your needs weren't consistently met or validated.
Yeah.
But as you start to, like, recognize and address those wounds, you'll find that it becomes so much easier to assert yourself.
Yeah, to, like, stand up for yourself.
Yeah, and to prioritize your own well-being. And when you do that, you'll see this ripple effect in other areas of your life, too.
Oh, what?
Well, the source talks about how people experience increased confidence and
Yeah.
self-worth as they heal from these childhood patterns.
Well, yeah, if you're not carrying around all that baggage,
Check us out.
then you can finally see your own value.
Yeah, it's like shedding that old ill-fitting coat and finally feeling comfortable in your own skin.
And then that confidence like spills over into your career and your relationships.
Absolutely. Everything you do, your finances, your creative pursuits,
Yeah.
even your health and well-being.
It's like a total transformation.
Yeah, it really is. The source actually uses this phrase, moving from surviving to thriving,
I love that.
to describe this shift.
Because it's like you're not just getting by anymore.
So you're not just going through the
You're
motions.
actually like living.
You're living a life that feels aligned with your true potential.
That's so inspiring, but I think there are people listening right now who are like, well, my childhood wasn't perfect, but it wasn't that bad.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think I have any trauma.
Right, and that's a really important point. And the source acknowledges that trauma isn't always about these big dramatic events.
Mm-hmm.
It's really about the impact that those experiences had on our developing nervous system.
So even if you didn't experience like abuse or neglect, those smaller, more subtle things can still leave a mark.
Absolutely. Things like emotional neglect, feeling constantly criticized, those can accumulate
Yeah.
and have this profound impact on how we view ourselves and the world.
And I think the tricky thing is that we often like normalize those experiences.
Well-
We're like, oh, everybody goes through that. It's not a big deal.
Yeah. But the truth is, those seemingly small things can have this huge impact.
Yeah. And we might not even realize we're carrying these wounds until we start to look at those patterns and those like emotional responses that keep popping up.
Exactly. It's like those things that keep tripping us up over and over again.
Yeah. So it's not about blaming our parents or like dwelling on the past.
Not at all.
It's about understanding why we are the way we are.
Exactly. It's about understanding the root causes so we can finally break free.
And that's where the EFT and the hacking reality come in.
That's where those tools can be so powerful.
Yeah, because they give us a way to like rewrite those old narratives and create a new story for ourselves.
A more empowering story.
Yes. And it's not just about changing our internal world, like how we feel on the inside.
Right.
The source actually talks about some like physical and emotional benefits
Oh, yeah.
that people experience as they heal from trauma. So tell me more about that.
Well, one of the first things people notice is they start to feel more grounded and centered. They experience less anxiety, less overwhelm. They're better able to regulate their emotions.
Oh, that makes sense. If you're releasing all that stress,
Yeah, all that pent-up energy.
and nervous system's going to chill out.
It's going to calm down. And when that happens, we can actually be more present,
Yeah.
more engaged in our lives. We can experience more joy, more connection, more fulfillment in our relationships, our work, even our hobbies.
So it's like we're finally able to come out of survival mode
Yeah,
and actually start living.
that's a great way to put it.
But I imagine this process isn't always easy. Are there like challenges that come up?
You know, there can be. And one of the biggest challenges we see is emotional resistance because we get attached to our familiar patterns,
Even if they're not good for us.
even if they're causing us pain. And so when we start to challenge those deeply ingrained beliefs, it can trigger fear, doubt,
Yeah.
even a desire to go back to what's comfortable.
Like we're breaking out of prison, but then we want to go back to our cell.
Right, because it's familiar, it's what we know.
Yeah. But how do we deal with that resistance then?
Well, the source suggests approaching it with curiosity rather than force.
Okay.
So ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen if I let go of this pattern? What am I holding on to?
That's a good question.
It is. And sometimes just bringing awareness to that resistance is enough to soften it.
Okay.
You can also use EFT to tap on the feeling of resistance itself.
Oh, wow. So we're using the same techniques to deal with the trauma and the resistance to healing.
That's right. It's all connected. And
Yeah.
as you work through those layers, you'll start to notice shifts in your energy, your emotions,
Yeah.
even your behavior.
Okay, so we talked about a lot, but before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Yeah.
what's like one piece of advice you would give to someone who's just starting out on this journey?
I would say trust the process.
Okay.
Healing takes time. It takes patience. And it takes a whole lot of self-compassion. There will be moments of doubt. There will be frustration and there will be setbacks, but you are not alone.
Yeah.
And you have the power to create a life that feels aligned with your true self.
I love that. And we're going to talk more about how to do that, how to take those first steps in the next part of our deep dive. So stay tuned. All right, so we are back for the final part of our deep dive into, rewiring these childhood patterns. And we've talked about a lot of stuff like how to recognize trauma responses and techniques like EFT and hacking reality. But now I want to know, what can people actually do? Like, what are some steps that they can take to start this journey?
Well, It can feel overwhelming at first,
Mm-hmm.
but even those small steps
Yeah.
can make a big difference. And the source actually gives some really great guidance on how to approach this work in a way that feels empowering and compassionate.
Yeah, I think the self-compassion piece is huge, especially when we're dealing with, stuff from our past.
hmm
So what would you say is like the most important first step?
Awareness,
Yeah.
it all starts with just noticing those patterns and those emotional responses that might
Mm-hmm.
be rooted in our past. So pay attention to any recurring themes in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Things like relationship challenges, career struggles, negative self-talk, even physical symptoms.
So like the things that keep tripping us up?
Exactly, those patterns that just seem to repeat no matter how hard we try to break free.
Yeah. Okay, so once you see those patterns, then,
Well,
well,
then you can start to kind of dig a little deeper and explore, where they came from.
okay.
Journaling can be a really powerful tool for this. The source recommends asking yourself questions like, when did I first start feeling this way?
Mm-hmm.
What experiences in my childhood might have contributed to this pattern?
Yeah, journaling is great for that. Like just getting all those thoughts and feelings out on paper.
Yeah. And if those memories are painful or difficult to access,
Yeah, because sometimes they are.
it can be really helpful to work with a trained therapist or an EFT practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
They can guide you through that process in a safe and supportive way.
Yeah, but what if you're not ready for like one-on-one support?
There are tons of resources online.
Yeah.
There are guided EFT tapping meditations on YouTube,
Oh, cool.
apps that walk you through the process step by step.
Mm.
You could even find online communities and forums where people share their experiences and support each other.
Oh, that's cool. It's like finding your tribe.
It is. And don't underestimate the power of just basic self-care practices.
Yeah.
Things like mindfulness, spending time in nature, gentle exercise, engaging in creative activities.
Those are all so good.
All those things can help to soothe your nervous system and create that sense of safety.
Yeah. But what about when those old emotions come up?
Yeah.
Like what do you do when you're hit with like a wave of fear or anger or sadness?
Well, that's normal.
Okay.
Healing isn't linear. There will be times when those old wounds feel really raw. And the key is to meet those emotions with compassion.
So like don't try to push them away.
Don't judge them.
Just let yourself feel them.
Allow yourself to feel them. And EFT can be really helpful for processing those emotions. By tapping on those points while you're focusing on that specific feeling, you're helping your body to release that trapped energy.
Okay, so what if you're feeling resistant? Like what if you're scared to actually let go of those old patterns even though they're causing you pain?
Resistance is totally normal. It's
Yeah.
part of the process.
Okay.
Those patterns served us at some point. They helped us to survive. So it's understandable that we might be a little hesitant to let them
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, but then how do you get past that?
Well, the source suggests approaching resistance with curiosity rather than force.
Okay.
So ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen if I let go? What am I holding on to?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And sometimes just bringing awareness to that resistance is enough to kind of soften it.
Okay.
You can also use EFT to tap on the feeling of resistance itself.
So we're using those same techniques to deal with the trauma and the resistance.
That's right. It's all connected.
Wow.
And as you work through those layers, you'll start to notice shifts in your energy, your emotions, your behavior.
This has been so helpful. I feel like we've covered so much ground.
We have.
But as we wrap up, is there like one final piece of advice that you would give to our listeners?
Trust the process.
Mm-hmm.
Healing takes time. It takes patience. It takes self-compassion. There will be those moments of doubt and frustration and even setbacks.
Mm-hmm.
But remember, you're not alone.
Mm.
And you have the power to create a life that truly feels aligned with your true self.
That is such a good reminder. So to everyone listening, remember that your childhood experiences, they don't have to define your future. You have all the tools and the strength that you need to break free from those old patterns and create a life that feels amazing. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.